On the AI side, that I think is a little bit different, right? Like the way we kind of look at it is these tools that are coming down the pipe. You think about sort of really any of them. Dolly, Midjourney, Firefly, Sora. They're really incredible. Um, but we shouldn't confuse them for being competitive advantages. Like and the goal of a marketer is not just to make content. The goal of a marketer is to drive business result and to outcompete your competitors. And so Sora is one of the most incredible things ever, but so is Google Maps. Like Google Maps is amazing. Like the idea that you can literally like just pick up your phone, type in an address 4,000 miles away, and it'll tell you exactly what combination of boats, trains, and subways to get there. That's amazing. But it's not a competitive advantage. Every person on the planet has it. And you could just as easily use Waze or Apple Maps and you'd get exactly the same place. But what really matters is, do you have the right address, right? Like the input into that software drives the value. And so like that's kind of our view on the AI is like it doesn't really matter whether you're using Sora or Dolly or Midjourney. Like that's great, use them all. But knowing what input to put in, that's what's going to drive, does my brand sell more than my competitor or not?
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Super excited to be chatting with Alex Collmer today, who founded VidMob. And before we jump into VidMob and the importance of getting the right creative to the right audience at the right time, I'd love to have you tell the story about how you took some of your top team over to Africa recently to do some charitable work.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, it's a great place to start. And yeah, Kevin, thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk about that. So, yeah, we started a foundation in, I guess, 2017 called VidMob Gives, and I've been working at this point now with hundreds of charities kind of all over the world, and helping to use our software and our expertise to basically help them communicate more effectively, the same way we'd help any of our sort of large enterprise marketers. And um, we we sort of saw that our employees enjoyed that work, and so we sort of expanded the scope of it, and that took the form of doing these annual service trips that when people get sort of high performance ratings, they're sort of eligible to go on these. First one was to Brazil. We helped build a couple of homes for homeless women. And this most recent one, which was last week, which I had the pleasure of kind of going on, was to Rwanda. So we've been working for years with an organization there called Comera, which basically helps empower young girls to continue with their education if their families can't afford that. Make sure they have the supplies, the support, the things to continue to be successful. And through this has helped like hundreds of girls grow up and become sort of leading women in the community, start and build businesses, and have really had a pretty incredible impact. So we went there to help build a playground for a group of sort of community teen mothers, and then ultimately like a chicken hatchery so that they could basically have eggs for food, but more importantly, have a sort of repeatable source of sellable chickens, which would provide income to the women in the program. So it was a week of carrying large, heavy stones and bricks, then learning how to build sort of a house, and working hand in hand with the people that run the program, a bunch of the girls in the program. And it was frankly like one of the better weeks of my life. Like it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's a testament to you personally, but it also sets an example, I think, for the broader industry about how to, do good and do well at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great opportunity for me to connect more deeply with some of our, most talented employees. That was great. Um, And yeah, it's hard not to feel good, come back energized. And I think, all of us came back looking to drive the business forward more rapidly so we'd have more resources to fund programs like this and hopefully continue that. So I would definitely advocate it to any company, and if anyone is interested in learning kind of like the formula or program that we run, I'm happy to chat with folks and tell them how to do it.
Cool, cool. Well, let's jump into VidMob. Not everybody necessarily knows your elevator pitch, and the elevator pitch may have evolved since you founded it. So, if you want to start with the origin story and then sort of say what's the current elevator pitch, that'd be cool.
Sure. It has evolved a bit. I mean, maybe it was a staircase pitch in the beginning. Now it's an elevator pitch. But yeah, I mean, I think any company, any technology business these days is going to have to evolve a fair amount because the pace of change in the market is so rapid. When we started VidMob, the thinking was really, hey, we're going from a text and image based internet to one where more complex media types dominate. Yes, video being first, but then AR. Now we're seeing sort of virtual reality. I think we're going to continue to progress towards more and more complex media types. And in that progression, it gets more and more difficult for marketers to communicate uh, both just how do you do so, and then how do you afford to and scale and have the expertise, et cetera. So this was essentially 10 years ago. This is our 10-year anniversary. And right out the gate, we started partnering with platforms. So, like Snap and then Facebook and Google and others, because they had a fairly simple problem, which was that if advertiser content didn't perform, folks wouldn't spend money. And so we developed relationships with pretty much all of the platforms, helping to improve large marketer creative performance. And so it was sort of a symbiotic three-way relationship. As that business scaled, we realized that we needed to start building workflow software to make that creative process easier. And that ended up with then connecting into ads APIs so that we could distribute sort of finished work with sort of a single button push. So, like push a button, have all your content go to the ads managers at Amazon and TikTok and Facebook and Google, et cetera. And as we plugged into those ads APIs, we started getting performance data back at the creative level. And so this was around 2017, and it was kind of just happened to be right around the time that AI was starting to become capable. And we had this realization. There was sort of like, well, if we can develop AI pipelines to sort of programmatically understand all of the creative decisions that have happened inside of a 10-second Instagram ad, then we can take all that sort of creative decisioning data and compare it to the behavior data. And we can do that across millions of ads and start to help marketers not understand like which ads are working because they know that, and not understand like how well they're working, but actually like why does this ad work for this audience but not that one? Why was it working last week but it's not working this week? Why does it work on Meta but it's not working on TikTok? And today that is really our business. Like we are sort of the creative data company, and when we're working with our clients who tend to be kind of large global enterprise marketers, they're coming to us because we have this sort of enterprise grade software and analytics suite that's going to enable them to kind of have visibility into every piece of creative ever in the world, learn what the best practices are by audience, by format, by platform, and then kind of codify that and kind of raise the floor on everything.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, that's really awesome. I think it dovetails into a follow-up question, which is, back when I started in advertising at J. Walter Thompson and McCann Erickson, a lot of the times the creative brief would make the assumption that, you can create some kind of an ad, even whether it's sort of TV or now what would be video, that you can create one ad that resonates against everybody, every persona, every subsegment. It's like, that's it. This is the big picture. This is the big idea ad. This is the one, right? And it's sort of the Mad Men style way of creating an ad, right? And now, with segmentation at all these different levels, down to hyper segmentation, even one-to-one creative, hypothetically, right, with AI, sort of how should people be thinking about it now? Like, should they be still thinking about it from pretty big segments? Like, okay, I do have six different personas and maybe I want different ads for those different personas? Or should they really be thinking, okay, no, we need to go more granular than that. Like we need the AI to help figure out what's the right ad at the right message, right ad, right message, right time, right audience, right? Where's that sweet spot?
Yeah, I think it's sort of in between, right? It's not making millions of personalized ads to I think that becomes inefficient,
Right.
and the gains aren't really there. But it's definitely also not like one or a couple. Like I think it's like understanding very purposefully who are the audiences that you're going after, and then using both normative data and kind of in-flight learnings to figure out how do you optimize and improve the creative so that you're getting the most effective results possible with them. And I think like that's sort of the big change in view where it's very common for people to expect to optimize their media decisioning and targeting and everything every day, right? Like every marketer on the planet is expecting every day to make the optimizations of their media strategies. But and if you ask people how important creative is, like Google says that 70% of results come from creative, and yet people like oftentimes like never even consider the idea of like using data to optimize that creative. So like there's just a logical disconnect in the way we as an industry are behaving. um and what we sort of see is you're talking about creative in sort of the dozens, not in the millions, to be kind of quite successful. um
Yeah, I make the point to clients and prospects all the time that creative to some extent is in the midst of a renaissance because when you used to be able to get a discount on media by buying more of it, then mediocre creative could sometimes still work. But when you're in an auction-based environment, your ability to afford the creative is directly related to how well the creative resonates against that audience, right? And so it becomes table stakes at that point that you have great creative that actually works. And then obviously that shouldn't stop with the landing pages. You need to have every touch point all the way through, even lifetime value optimization. If you're a direct response marketer, you need to have all that stuff working in your benefit. Otherwise, you can't afford the media, right? And I think your platform really plays into that because you're that piece of middleware that makes sure at least it's the right message to the right audience at the right time.
well, and the right like tactical execution, I think, is sort of a key point. Like I don't we're not gonna replace the Mad Men sort of example. Like I still think there's great like wonder and beauty and power in sort of the very human idea of kind of storytelling and great like brand messaging. But within that, like, where's the beef campaign, or like you're not you when you're hungry Snickers ad, or there is also, in addition to that, there's a tactical execution where if you open up with a close up of the old woman or the burger, like you might, for the basically the exact same ad, exact same message, you might see a 400% lift in results on TikTok versus Snapchat.
Right.
uh, and so like that, what we sort of see this is like this is a sort of like a new science and new data capability that doesn't replace the old thing. It just like kind of adds on and helps make it more effective.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like slight changes in the way something is cut or shot, or the choreography of the identical message can make a huge difference.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So it leads to an interesting follow-up question, which is obviously you've sort of got a continued explosion in influencer marketing and VIP based, brand relationships where there's this Hollywood star, music star, or whatever. But then you've got this entire influencer ecosystem where, they bring a lot to a brand potentially, especially if the brand empowers them to sort of wiggle around a little bit with the creative brief and like make it authentic, make it their own. And so you've got that, but at the same time you've got AI creative, right, which potentially has the ability to either work with that persona, with the licensing of that persona, right, and use that, but tweak it and adjust it, or to even, replace that individual. So, any thoughts on sort of where we are in that evolution? Obviously, stuff's changing almost on a weekly basis there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is probably a weekly basis. I kind of think of them in sort of two separate camps in a sense. I mean, I
Right.
understand influencers are going to use AI tools, but I think on the influencer side first, um, what we sort of see is like a couple things from that. So like if you're now going to have, let's say, 1,000 influencers out there creating kind of micro content for a brand, um, it actually creates a much more fertile ground for these types of creative data, tools to learn about the customer. I mean, because ultimately what this is this about like VidMob at its root is sort of like a cloud supercomputer that just watches how every customer responds to every piece of creative, or not even just every frame within every creative. Um, and so the wonderful thing about these really rich, diverse, like kind of influencer campaigns is that there's a lot to learn from.
Mm,
And when you have it properly instrumented, you can learn not just like what creative works, but you can actually start to learn about the customer. And so that can have like product implications and so like I think that actually is quite interesting. There's also kind of a compliance and security and safety component, which here's a way to kind of like programmatically make sure that like all these things have your brand featured, or like the what's being said isn't violating certain things you don't want to cross over, and like because there is you do want to give open canvas to the influencer, but at the same time these are valuable brands that need to be protected, and I think that's obviously like is important. On the AI side, that I think is a little bit different, right? Like the way we kind of look at it is these tools that are coming down the pipe. You think about sort of really any of them, Dolly, Midjourney, Firefly, Sora, they're really incredible. Um, but we shouldn't confuse them for being competitive advantages. Like and the goal of a marketer is not just to make content. The goal of a marketer is to drive business result and to outcompete your competitors. And so Sora is one of the most incredible things ever, but so is Google Maps. Like Google Maps is amazing. Like the idea that you can literally like just pick up your phone, type in an address 4,000 miles away, and it'll tell you exactly what combination of boats, trains, and subways to get there. That's amazing. But it's not a competitive advantage. Every person on the planet has it. And you could just as easily use Waze or Apple Maps and you'd get exactly the same place. But what really matters is, do you have the right address, right? Like the input into that software drives the value. And so like that's kind of our view on the AI is like it doesn't really matter whether you're using Sora or Dolly or Midjourney. Like that's great, use them all. But knowing what input to put in, that's what's going to drive, does my brand sell more than my competitor or not? Like, should I tell it to make this so that the actress is 2 feet from the camera or four? Because that might lead to 7x performance difference. And so our view is that basically like creative data, like proprietary creative data and the insights that come from that, those are the path to competitive advantage for a marketer. And that's how you get basically like differentiated results using commodity tools.
right, right. Yeah, I love your thinking about how when you've got more and more influencers potentially as creative partners, right? It creates a diversity of content that would be very difficult to replicate in a traditional agency environment, right? And if you sort of think about the influencer ecosystem in general, it's sort of a meritocracy, right? So the good bubbles up to the surface, or maybe at least the clickbait does. But there's a meritocracy algorithm in there of some sort. And similarly, when you're using influencer creative and other creative in your platform, it's also meritocracy based, right? You set the KPIs, and the better stuff for those individuals will bubble up to the surface and become the ads that run more often. Is there burnout, that happens within the ad ecosystem, or is it very different based on the creative? Like some has a lot of staying power, some, works really great and then stops working.
Yeah, well, I think the like decay is more rapid today than it ever has been. So
Interesting.
that leads to much more like voracious appetite for creative and creative freshness. And I think there's always going to be sort of a pendulum back and forth.
Right.
Heavily in kind of a UGC kind of creator moment. It's hard for me not to imagine that as the airwaves get kind of flooded with a lot of pretty similar looking content that doesn't eventually kind of lose some of its appeal. Like, and I do also sort of wonder, like, when you ask people what's so great about um, influencer content, a lot of times the answer is, well, it's authentic. It's the authenticity. And I think that sort of presupposes that the consumer is pretty stupid, because all these influencers are paid. It's fundamentally inauthentic. And so like I also just kind of wonder about that. Like, my general view is anytime your like resting premise is that your customer is stupid, like there's probably not a good long-term bet, but
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we tend to serve more the mid-market, but one of the things we did for one client is sort of use deep data to figure out which of their current customers had decent social media footprints, not mega influencers, but like big enough to
yeah.
matter, right? And we felt like, well, that at least solves the authenticity problem because these are already existing customers. They literally took their credit card out and bought the stuff. And the fact that they, happen to have a good social media reach is just a bonus, right? And so we should probably do outreach to them and get them involved. Of course, that also, bridges the okay. So you might get them cheap, more inexpensively because they're already a fan, right? And there's often no agent involved, and they're also small enough. But that doesn't lend itself to scalability, right? Whereas it sounds like your clients it needs something scalable, right? They need to be able to constantly be out there iterating in message, iterating in content, and they need to feed the machine.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to work with sort of like the world's largest marketers. For better or for worse, that's just the kind of who we focused our software on. And so yeah, like scale, like they're generally dealing in the like hundred hundreds of billions of impressions, and it's sort of a different challenge. And then the challenge is like, all right, well, I have hundreds, maybe even thousands of suppliers in my content supply chain. Like, I don't even know what's going on in a lot of this content. I have tens of thousands of pieces of content in market at any point in time. Can you give me a way to just have visibility into like how many of them have a logo? How many of them are featuring are actually our old logo from before the brand refresh, and that just haven't gotten updated yet. Like, it's just
Mhm.
a lot of stuff that like isn't really an issue with a mid-market or SMB client who's going to be like all over all that.
Right, right. Um, do you find that there's a particular percentage of your clients, either directly or through agencies, that are using more sort of upper funnel branding type KPIs versus lower funnel, more direct response type KPIs to optimize around?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. And I think you see, people getting more and more sophisticated around the combination of the two. I mean, like I'm on the board of the MMA, or on the sort of like data and media data board, and they released some research recently about how brand campaigns have a multiplicative impact on future performance
Oh,
campaigns.
for sure. Yeah.
And so I do think like we're often working with clients, who for different campaigns have different, so sometimes we'll be looking at sort of media metrics, or, tying into like MMM models, or, brand lift, and then in other cases we're looking at comparing through to like, clean room data to look at like, offline sales, or, or in the easiest case, like sort of direct digital sales. But
Right, right.
and I
Um,
think it doesn't really matter, right? Like, I think like as long as we have a clear sense of what the KPI is that matters,
yeah.
then we can do the sort of analysis of like how to optimize your creative to drive that KPI. But it does, like, it's going to vary. Like, if your goal is awareness, there are going to be different creative best practices than if your goal is
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
One other thing that hasn't really changed as dramatically as perhaps I thought it might, back, when I graduated from grad school in 92, like there were direct response agencies and branding agencies. And like it was up to somebody at the client level to make sure that there was sort of a consistency of branding, consistency of messaging. But even then it was often like completely siloed apart from each other. And everyone sort of would start to throw around this idea of, oh yeah, get like holistic, unified, blah, blah, blah. And just sort of still here we are, 30 years later. And it's still extremely siloed where sometimes bigger brands have a direct response agency and they've got a branding agency and then they've got a PR agency, and PR agency may actually be handling influencer marketing for some strange reason. They just felt like it's storytelling. And so that's why they're handling it, because they have got a division for that. And so, it's up to brand managers or CMOs to sort of herd the cats together, right? And figure out how to get this all to work together. But I would imagine often in your case, it's one of those touch points that's the client, right, for VidMob.
Yeah, absolutely. And like what happens is we'll end up sort of coming in through a brand and a region with a strategy, and then it oftentimes then kind of like grows within the org. And next thing you know, you're dealing with the people on the retail media side, or people in some foreign market, and yeah. So it that part of it's kind of fun.
Right.
And sometimes what it then is about is like bringing kind of holistic visibility to the CMO, so that he or she can actually get a better handle on what's going on, and ideally surface sort of transferable insights more rapidly, and then share them throughout the brand portfolio or global portfolio, with greater speed.
Right. So that brings me to a question. It seems like sometimes your data is actually potentially informing brand strategy changes, right? So to the extent that you become a learning platform, not just a media optimization, you don't
Yes.
just solve the media optimization problem, you potentially inform changes in positioning, maybe even changes in pricing, right? Based on information that you get back.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of gets to the point earlier from the influencer. Like as you get all this instrumented, then you really do get to a point where your creative becomes a vehicle to learn about the customer,
Hmm.
in addition to a vehicle to drive business results. So what we sort of see is that we're kind of plugging in kind of like four places in the content, like marketing supply chain.
Right.
So first is like all the way up front in that so like creative planning, phase. So like, like using the insights and analysis from the past couple of years of historical creative work. So you're actually like influencing, creative decisioning, the types of, productions you're going to do, et cetera.
Right.
Then during the production process, so when people are actually like, like editing content, we're actually now rolling out, a plugin that's going to sit inside of the Adobe environment. So Adobe is actually one of our investors. So within, After Effects and other, software within the Creative Cloud, folks will be able to actually score the content that they're working on for its adherence to, the platform best practices that it's destined for. So like if this is intended to be an Instagram stories ad, well, I want to make sure that before I even render it, it's sort of following what I believe to be the best practices there. And then my brand is going to have data-driven custom best practices that we've determined, like golden rules type things. I want to make sure I'm adhering to those. And then I also know what audiences this is intended to, and there's certain learnings that we would have gotten from having kind of visibility across tens of millions of ads. And so like you check all those boxes literally before you even render the creative file.
Right.
And so that then eliminates a ton of creative waste and back and forth and platform rejection and et cetera, et cetera. Then as we get into like media decisioning, the creative scores that were come up with in that beginning, those are valuable inputs into media decision. So like if something is scoring like a 3 out of 100 on Facebook readiness, well, it probably shouldn't have dollars spent behind it. Um, and then finally, you have kind of like a kind of a ongoing like sort of media optimization, making sure that dollars are continuing to be allocated behind your best performing creative and learning. And so we look to like instrument that whole creative workflow, and by plugging creative data appropriately into that whole apparatus, you sort of make the whole content supply chain like intelligent.
Hmm. So you mentioned earlier and sort of alluded to it, in your scoring discussion here, that sometimes creative messages don't work in a particular platform. So do you feel like that's just sort of intrinsic to something about their creative specs? Is it more audience driven that the audience there has a different expectation or different types of creative resonate in that for those audiences? Like what's the driver for something being a winner in TikTok and failing in Instagram or whatever, failing in YouTube?
Yeah, I think it's audience oriented, it's mindset oriented. Like someone might be like more entertained within a TikTok environment, whereas in the Snap, they might be there more for communicating with their friends. So they're sort of like it's in a slightly different like mindset. It's about context and what they're watching and seeing, um, and also it's about kind of like what they're kind of either consciously or subconsciously expecting to experience in that environment. Um, so like I think all of those things are factors, and like the one thing that I often think about is if we're talking about a format like like a 2 hour movie, that's a very human experience. You're going to experience that story in I think a way that is really unique, and I'm not totally sure that we have a great deal of value to add to that, at least today. But if you're going through like a feed and wrap it, and you sort of attention is sort of scattered across a variety of things, like we actually do process that a lot like machines. And so that I think is quite different. And they're like are pretty like again like fairly tactical things that can be learned, and for a lot of times pretty subtle small changes can lead to like almost unbelievable changes in performance. Like
Yeah.
we more often than not are seeing changes in the tens or hundreds of percent, like and it just is it's surprising.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. When there's a situation where the brand would like to spend in a particular platform, but either as a result of the sort of readiness score or as a result of sort of the in-market testing, it seems like none of the current creative executions are hitting the KPIs that are necessary. Are there any best practices to sort of going back to the drawing board where you can advise either the internal creative team or the agency, like, listen, we never got something to work in Insta, or we never got this creative just isn't working in this particular channel, but I know you'd like to spend there because your audience is there, and here's how we fix this.
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's I think hopefully a big part of what we're bringing to a lot of our clients is that data-driven agility, right? So
Right.
so like at first it's just a mindset shift, which is like, hey, like your creative is changeable. Like
Right.
like you don't have to just stick with it for the whole run. Like so like and then once you get through that mindset shift, then it's sort of like, all right, well, how do we make it cost effective? How do we make it, like yeah, sort of timely, like and so and how do we do it in a way where there's like sort of control, for the marketer? Um, I know we're going to see an increasing rise in sort of like pure black box, like say AI kind of like creative optimizers. And I think that's going to be really compelling and attractive for the SMB, for the, mid-market, marketer who really does just care about like results today. But for a larger marketer, giving up control of your brand and how it's executed, and maybe more importantly, giving up visibility into the learnings that come from that is pretty existentially dangerous. Um, and so like I think that's kind of the balance that we're sort of playing into.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean with most of our clients, either we or their own creative agency or internal creative team are developing the systems to be quite agile and like rapidly make changes when they see something is like underperforming the benchmark for a given platform or.
Yeah, one advantage obviously that big marketers have, and those are the folks you're dealing with, is the data comes in faster, right?
Yep.
Because they've got bigger budgets behind things. And so that allows either a standard regression or something AI based to start learning and start figuring out results pretty quickly. So where does that sweet spot start? Is it on a channel by channel basis, X hundreds of thousands per channel, or is it overall media budget where all of a sudden it makes sense for somebody to consider, oh, well, this might be good for VidMob?
Yeah, I think it's actually like it doesn't take an enormous amount of media spend. I think what's more important is having sort of creative variety. Like
Mhm.
if you just have sort of one asset in the channel, it's kind of hard to do much learning there. We can kind of
Yeah.
pull from our like normative database and say, hey, across the overall CPG category, here's what we've sort of seen across these millions of ads.
Right.
Um, but I think it's more like number of assets driven than spend driven, because if you're spending $5-10 a media, then it breaks. But you'd be surprised how kind of little spend is necessary to drive kind of a meaningful number of impressions that you can learn from.
Cool. Well, what has you excited over the next year, either industry wide or within your own product roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, I continue to just I mean, I'm excited about the sort of tumult that's coming. Like I feel like the more change, the better for kind of a nimble, aggressive business. So I think obviously the final deprecation of cookies is continuing to kind of force more responsibility to creative to drive results. Like
Mhm.
I think like they just can't rely on media targeting the way we used to. Um, I think the rise of AI tools and video AI tools is really exciting. I think we're pretty quickly heading into a world where every marketer on the planet's going to have kind of infinite capability to create anything they want. And so that, like, for us is really exciting because it sort of creates then like a need for information about what I should tell it to make. Um, we're building our own LLM so that our insights will be more sort of like conversationally accessible, and so we're pretty excited about that. The Adobe plugin is exciting for us because it basically means we're working on pushing out into existing workflow as opposed to forcing people to come to vidmob.com.
Right.
Uh, like show up where people are working today, make their lives easier there. Don't make them change their behavior.
Hmm. Uh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Will that plugin be demoed at the upcoming Adobe Summit?
Um, so I don't think so. It's close, but it's not quite ready.
Okay.
Uh,
Just curious. I know it's coming up pretty shortly.
yeah, yeah, no, exactly. And then yeah, variety. Yeah, we're definitely doing more sort of partnering in the measurement world, which is also pretty exciting. It's helps our clients get better visibility into the impact of creative decisioning, and so um, making that kind of more seamless.
Cool. Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining me. Excellent conversation on all the various elements of optimization of video media against audiences. That's really cool.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's fun conversation. Obviously, happy to chat whenever.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.